Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. Later, a business perspective on what should be done about Kentucky's severe public pension shortfall and tax reform. Kentucky Chamber of Commerce President Dave Adkisson will be with us in just a few minutes. But first, Lexington Police Chief Mark Barnard is joining us. It's been a tough summer for the police, at least here recently. Last weekend saw a round of shootings. 2 of those cases were fatal. Another was outside the busy Fayette Mall. The drug addiction and overdose problem shows very few signs of slowing down, and Lexington's new panhandling ordinance went into effect earlier this week. The chief has been watching to see how that's going. Chief Barnard has spent more than 30 years on the Lexington police force, and now as its leader has a lot on his plate. Chief, thanks for coming in.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Last weekend we did see one of those spikes that you hope is very unusual, certainly. Right. A man killed by stray bullets in the East End. There was that scary shooting outside Fayette Mall as shopping was wrapping up on a busy evening, and then a fatal shooting off Versailles Road. And unfortunately, shootings continued into this week. What do you think about in a time like this?
Well, we look at root causes why those shootings are occurring, and what we know so far is innocent victims have been caught up in some of the violence that we've seen, and that happened on Race Street. We made an arrest on Race Street. We will continue to make more arrests on Race Street as we go throughout the week. What we're seeing are groups or factions that are dealing with either the drug trade or with retaliation, and they're going after each other, and they go through social media or they go through other venues and they're doing retaliation. We have Amaya, who was an innocent 12-year-old girl on her 12th birthday that was struck, paralyzed, and that was another incident that occurred that was tragic in the fact that she wasn't even involved in it, so another truly innocent victim. And it's a small group of individuals we see throughout Lexington. We have a lot of influence coming from Chicago, coming from Detroit. And the sad thing about it, Bill, is we have 15, 16-year-old kids that we're looking at involved in some of these homicides. And to see them running around with guns and track them through some of the violence throughout Lexington, you got to look at why that's occurring, where is the families, what's going on with the structure that we have in our society. And we have the influence right now where people used to have a community just in Lexington or smaller communities. They're being influenced now by social media, what's on TV, what's happening in Chicago, Detroit, and thinking that's the norm when it's not.
The previous stance from the police department has been that everybody basically is safe because these are people who may know each other, this kind of thing. But now you are acknowledging that some of this is reaching out and becoming random situations that are hurting innocent people.
Oh, absolutely. Now, the targeted violence is mostly between individuals that are knowing each other. So we look at our homicides this year. We know most of those individuals, one was a domestic violence case, other involved firearms, are known to each other that's occurring. But that doesn't stop the fact when you look at Kwame Elamine up in Douglas Park, when you look at Tamara Coleman's daughter, and Winburn, when you look at Amaya right now. So I meet with those families, I talk to those families. The horrible part of it, we were at a peace march on Friday or Saturday with Anita Franklin, whose son was caught up in that. And it was with 10 mothers who have lost their sons that we were down with in the park. And as soon as I leave the park, I have to go to Fayette Mall because of shooting between 2 individuals that knew each other. And they're not taking into consideration that they are hurting other people because they're so bent and focused on each other. The other thing is when we're talking to the victims, what makes it very difficult for our investigators is, can you give us a description? No. Do you know who the suspect is? No. And then we find out later on that they know each other. And so we're not getting the cooperation from some of our victims. Our homicide unit and the violent crimes unit has worked, strenuously over the last 2 weeks to work on some of these cases, all the way back to Amaya's shooting and Honey J. Court that they're still working on, and we expect an arrest in that pretty soon. So they're working strenuously. It's just not enough hours in the day to put these cases together. It's more difficult because people aren't coming forward with the information and they're really having to struggle to pull it out of people.
Chief, are you having to adjust strategy based on the fact that the scenarios are changing?
We have, and we did that the last time we were here. We talked about, we moved our gang resource officers into investigation. We're increasing that. We created a violent crimes unit, which works strictly at nighttime, so when those shootings occur and our robbery homicide units in the day, that they can address and get those baseline investigations done. Our CLEAR unit, our neighborhood resource officers are really penetrating those neighborhoods where we're seeing some of the violence and creating the relationships, and people are turning the information over to them. We just found a firearm that we were looking for that we never would have found if our neighborhood resource officer didn't have the connection with the community to say that firearm is over there. So they're helping us. People are community stepping forward, and we're moving forward with it. I think we're looking at this small group, and we're doing, by the time this airs on Saturday and Sunday, we'll already be completed part of our roundup. We work with the ATF, the FBI, Secret Service, other federal partners, U.S. Marshals, Probation Pro, Sheriff's Office. We did one roundup earlier in the year. We'll complete that roundup this weekend, and we'll have that. And I think we've taken 3 or 4 legal firearms off right now, over 10 felons that we have convicted that we picked up. So we're doing that roundup along with some of the other investigations.
You mentioned Anita Franklin, and many people in neighborhoods and who have been connected in some way to these shootings have been stepping up and speaking out about the violence. Do you think that more of that needs to be done, or are you satisfied with the cooperation you're now getting from neighborhoods and community leaders?
I wish everyone could meet Anita and Tanya and everyone else tomorrow that have lost a loved one and sit down in the room and talk to them and listen to their stories, and then they understand what their frustration is when they hear this no snitch culture. That no snitch culture comes from someone that has not lost a loved one like they have. I wish everyone would circle around the victims' families in our community. Amaya's a 12-year-old girl, Bill, that is loved to play sports, loved to swim, loved to play basketball, and now is confined to a wheelchair. And she has the most positive, best attitude of anybody I've ever seen. But that doesn't mean her life, her family's life have not changed forever. Her mother's had to leave work and work 24 hours to take care of her. Her father's picking up extra shifts, and they're doing that because of their family taking care of each other. That's a struggle that they'll go on through the rest of their lives. And I hope the whole community circles around our victims that have lost someone and say that their lives have changed to violence, and just say enough's enough. We're not putting up with it anymore. I
know you have visited her, the mayor
we have
visited with her, and those have been special visits.
Oh, she is the most, if you ever get a chance to meet her, she's the most energetic. Her smile will just, I mean, it's unbelievable. And she says, everybody looks at me now that I'm in my wheelchair, but I'm the most special person you'll see now because I'm going to change lives from this day on. And from a 12-year-old girl saying that, that's unbelievable. She is a special, uniquely special individual.
That's powerful. The drug issue in Kentucky shows few signs of slowing down. A record number of deaths last year, the numbers potentially running ahead of that this year. How often are first responders tied up in dealing with these overdose situations?
Well, that's if you ask our EC personnel, fire personnel, and the police department, most of our runs right now are dealing with overdoses, and probably the same individuals overdosing. I predict we'll be on a year record of seizures this year for narcotics in Fayette County, and I'm talking large amounts of methamphetamine, large amounts of heroin, and cocaine. I think we'll set a record again this year. We did last year. We'll set a record again this year. We see a lot of it coming out from Detroit or Chicago coming down into Lexington. We know that. We've seen it. We made cases on those, but the epidemic's still out there. I mean, it's growing. It's not going anywhere, and how we decide to address it, other than just incarcerating people and putting them right back out, which the court system is not built for right now. So that the emphasis is off incarceration, but we have to backlog that with what's next then. If you're not going to incarcerate people, then what kind of programs are you going to give them to help make them successful?
And obviously communities need resources to do that. And
absolutely.
Where do you shift the money to that, right? That's
exactly. Where are you
question.
taking it from to put it towards? And I think a strong, I'll say this again, a strong public safety presence is needed for deterrence. But once you make that arrest, once you introduce that person in the criminal justice system, somewhere else has to be what's next for that individual. We have a lot of juveniles right now. We have juveniles that we're arresting for stealing 10 to 15 cars in a week. We have juveniles that are involved in homicides right now. And so it's very difficult for us when we get a juvenile out and we can't arrest. You can't take them into custody. You have to take them back to their parents. Well, where did they come from to begin with? Excuse me. So that makes it a little difficult for the officers. So we have to figure out how do we want to treat that and what's the next step for our criminal justice system.
You had an unfortunate situation recently where an officer on patrol's cruiser struck and killed a pedestrian. There may be very little you can say about that, but what can you tell us?
Well, I can tell you it's an unfortunate incident that occurred. It's still under investigation. We're working with it. We have done the collision reconstruction unit has done their investigation. We've sent lab results off from everyone. The state police, we've invited them to come in, and we've talked to Alex Payne. and the commissioner, they're going to come in and review our case to make sure if there's anything else we need to look at or do more with. We do have body-worn camera footage, so we're blessed with that, so that helps piece it together so we can see exactly with the investigators, but it's still an ongoing investigation. The lab results take a little bit of time to get in. We've interviewed the officer, we've interviewed witnesses. Now we're doing the results and putting the case back together.
The officer is on duty in another capacity?
He is. He is on administrative leave, but he is on duty, so he is not working the streets right now while the investigation is moving forward.
The panhandling issue has been in the spotlight since the state Supreme Court struck down the local ordinance earlier this year, and now there's a new ordinance that basically targets jaywalking or walking out in the street, not necessarily the act of asking for money. How is that going so far? It's very early.
Well, it's very early, but we have seen, along with the van and along with some of the educational components that we're putting out and educating the business community about panhandling and jaywalking and this traffic safety ordinance, we've seen an increase, or I'm sorry, decrease in some of the acts that are going on. Property owners really need to be educated on what are my options to do it. You see it because you come into work here. You see it in Hamburg. We're posting signs in Hamburg on those private roads that are saying no trespassing, no criminal solicitation, or no solicitation, criminal trespass. So those individuals can be cited. The traffic safety ordinance hits our main arterials where we've had accidents before, and so you can't enter the street for any reason except at the crosswalk. So we're seeing it decrease. The van has been very productive for us. I mean, I get a lot of information because I talk to a lot of people at our parks and the other areas that are asking, where's the van, how can I get on it? And they're really taking individuals and putting them in other jobs. So that's been very good for us. So I think a deterrent, which is what the ordinance is about, and then giving people opportunities to make a better living.
Your department will be the largest ever with the passage of the new city budget. Will more manpower mean better service?
I think it will. I think it will. We're short right now because it takes a year to get through our academy. So we're about 50 officers short. We have 50 officers in the academy, and they're not on the street yet. We'll be hiring another class coming up, so I'm telling everybody right now, we're still recruiting, we're still looking at it, so we'll hire another class of about 50 this fall. We're looking at 25 to 35 this spring, and then we'll hire another class of about 50 next fall. So we're constantly out seeking good candidates to come in, but I think it'll give us better service right now. We've had to increase our narcotics unit because that's a tremendous drain on the community right now. We've had to increase neighborhood resource officers because they make that connection. And I've never seen the officers make as good a connection right now with the community as in my 30-year career, because they're actually out there. They're actually doing things, and they're being proactive. Who would have thought you'd make 70,000 popsicles? And if you need popsicles, call the police department, because we have 70,000 of them, and we're going to every community event passing them out. So the community's helped us. The officers are doing a much better job than I've ever seen them do before, and I see things moving in the right direction.
Chief, thanks for coming by. We appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you, Bill.
And stay with us on Kentucky Newsmakers. State Chamber of Commerce President Dave Adkisson joins me next. We'll talk about what business leaders hope to see in pension and tax reform. Coming up. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers from WKYT. House Speaker Jeff Hoover has called in House members to talk in mid-August about ways to dig Kentucky out of a pension problem considered one of the worst in the country. Governor Matt Bevin says he will be calling a special session of the state legislature. He indicates he wants lawmakers to tackle pensions and ways to modernize the state tax code. Kentucky Chamber of Commerce President and CEO Dave Adkisson is here to provide some perspective on what business leaders think should happen. In recent days, Moody's investors downgraded Kentucky's bond rating again. They made note of a tough climb out of this pension hole. Adkisson comes in with the unique perspective of having been on the public side as a former mayor of Owensboro and in private enterprise in his current post. Mr. Adkisson, thank you for coming. We appreciate it.
Glad to be here, Bill.
Governor Bevin says there's a 100% chance he's calling the state legislature into special session to deal with these two matters. The chamber referred to the leaky bucket years ago. I remember you were ahead on this. Are you surprised that things have gotten to this point?
Yes, we started banging the drum on the pension issue back before we really thought it was a crisis. We just saw what we called a train wreck coming, and that was back in 2006. And so we've been increasingly talking about how we need to fix the pension problem in Kentucky, which is arguably one of the worst situations among the states in the United States. Now, some changes have been made to the credit of the legislature. In 2008, teachers affected their system favorably, and in 2013, a major reform but we still find ourselves in this hole, and we've got to find a way to dig out.
Obviously, businesses are dependent on a strong economy, and those retirement checks are continuing to go out to those who receive them. What is the business perspective on finding a way to pay off those obligations?
Well, first, the pension crisis does have to have additional solution. We're not done yet. In other words, we absolutely support the governor in his plan to pull together a special session to deal with this problem. Secondly, we realize that it's going to take two things. One is what in Frankfurt is called structural changes. That's a euphemism for realigning benefits. And secondly, more money. Now, he put a lot more money into the pension systems in his 2016 budget without addressing, and at the time, brand new governor, he didn't have time to address the structural changes that are required. But I think we are going to have to look in this special session to changing the, realigning the benefits for future teachers, for future state workers, for future local workers, and also finding a way to put more money in.
So changing some such things as retirement age, maybe the mix of how the retirement benefit is done, that kind of thing?
Yes, we recently, 2 weeks ago, delivered a 5-page memo to the state budget director. He had met with our pension task force, business leaders, bankers, and others. He had met with us and said, give me your thoughts about how this thing needs to be handled. So we've sent a 5-page memo to him suggesting that in general, public employee retirement plan should move more toward what the private sector has been doing for a few decades. Now, we realize you can't just switch overnight. I mean, you've made promises to employees, and we are very much in favor of fulfilling those promises. I was asked just yesterday by a retired state worker, am I going to get my check? And yes, the answer is yes. But in terms of the future solvency of this pension plan, which is billions of dollars, we have got to make some changes. So, you know, the average person on the street, you, me, other people working at Walmart today, they think in terms of retirement being in their mid-60s. 62 is the age that most people can start to draw on Social Security. We have got to move toward that. You know, when the teachers' retirement system was set up in 1939, I believe it was, I mean, that's decades ago. The average adult today in Kentucky lives 16.3 years more than they did back in 1939, 1940. So adjustments have to be made.
Many people say that an element of the health of the economy is mental, the attitude, how people feel about how things are going. Do you feel this is dragging Kentucky's economy down?
It is affecting Kentucky's economy, both in terms of business confidence, but also more directly in terms of Wall Street. I mean, they look at that. They rate Kentucky on a regular basis. Moody's just downgraded our bonds again next year. What does that mean? It means that if you're going to build a public building, a city hall in Madisonville, a library in Covington, or a dormitory on the university campus, you're going to pay more for your money. So in other words, Wall Street is saying by that we don't have as much confidence today as we had yesterday in Kentucky.
Governor says he wants to do both things. He wants to deal with the pension crisis, and he wants to also address the Kentucky tax code, the tax reform, which has been proposed by many governors and has gone nowhere really over the years. Is tax reform the heavier political lift?
I think so. I think it is, but we're very much for tax reform, and we have been for several years. We're for tax reform if it accomplishes a couple of things. One is, will it make Kentucky more competitive for businesses? We need to be a business-friendly state that creates jobs for our kids and grandkids. Secondly, can we make it simpler for the average taxpayer? And third, if it produces more revenue for the state, we've actually adjusted our position on that to say, yes, that would be fine if the overall system is more competitive with other states. So, for example, when Governor Beshear had a program he rolled out, it didn't get anywhere, but we were actually favorable toward it. It would have produced another $200 or $300 million a year for the state, but it would have also made Kentucky more competitive on certain things that we want to see for the business community.
You watch the legislature closely. You know how they operate. We're heading toward an election year. Wouldn't many of those lawmakers fear anything that could in any way be construed as a tax increase be something they would run from?
I think that's a natural inclination. The legislature, after Governor Bevin announced during his State of the Commonwealth address, I think back in January, that he did see a need for new revenue to solve this pension problem. The legislature's been hesitant. I don't blame them. I would be too if I didn't have a plan on the table that I could react to. So we'll have to see. You know, it's one thing to be for taxes or against taxes, but then you have to compare it against, okay, what other remedies would there be? If you were facing cutting our schools and our universities in the 2018 budget by double-digit figures, well, then all of a sudden you might soften up to some of these other changes that might at first blush appear painful. So I think it needs to be treated comprehensively. Whether or not tax reform comes in a special session with pension reform is up to the governor and I guess legislative leaders talking to the governor. But if it doesn't, then I think we immediately have to address it in the 2018 session.
How difficult is it for you to be balancing these disparate interests that there might be? I mean, with you know, some of the small businesses fighting certain tax exemptions that might be there that they want to keep, while others might want something else. The larger companies might have a different view of things. It's difficult to balance all of that.
Yes, we represent a pretty big tent, from the big corporations in the state to the small hardware stores on Main Street. So yeah, we have to balance all that, but I think generally speaking it's safe to say that the business community prefers consumption-based taxes. In other words, they would prefer a sales tax to an income tax. We would rather tax consumption than production. So in other words, if you could lower individual and corporate income tax rates by upping sales tax, for example, and that's not a specific thing that's on the table right now, but if it were, that would be something the business community might warm up to. And business people are practical people. If they see that their taxes are going for something, now it's you know, bailing out a pension system is a struggle for all of us. You know, that's not exactly the most attractive thing in the world that you would do, but we're at a situation where we've got to do it, or we're going to be facing painful, painful cuts to our universities, to our schools, to our other basic services, roads, bridges. You know, we went through the recession with federal money coming in, you know, the stimulus money, seems like a century ago, but that federal stimulus money kept our schools from having to lay off a soccer coach or a French teacher or the band leader. I don't think we want to see that kind of cutback in what most of us citizens would expect from Frankfort.
Yeah. Dave Adkisson is with us. I want to ask you overall how people are feeling about business, how they're trying to identify and hire employees. We're back, our final minutes on Kentucky Newsmakers in a moment. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. We continue to visit with Dave Adkisson, who's the president and CEO of the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, talking about this, what appears to be an almost certain special legislative session coming up. You're saying that if Kentucky tackles tax reform, as the governor indicates he wants to see done, that it should all be done at once.
Well, that would be a good way to package it, because you have an emergency and a solution. But if that's not possible, due to legislative hesitance or whatever, then it needs to be in the 2018 session, and it can't just be a piecemeal, let's find a way to get another $100 million or whatever. If we're going to do tax reform, let's do comprehensive tax reform that really positions Kentucky for the modern age and in competition with our neighboring states. We've got to make a move that gives us an advantage.
How do you think our business is doing out there right now? We've had some good jobs announcements in recent months.
Yes, in terms of the headlines of what's come in the first, 7 months of the year, the state of Kentucky and Secretary Gill and Governor Bevin have mentioned the fact repeatedly that we are now over, in 6 months, we were over what all of the previous record year was, $5-6 billion, which is fantastic. Some major projects like Amazon, Brady Industries, Toyota's investment, Ford's investment, those are just a few. So there are investments being made. The business community is growing. Employment is growing. We would like to see some more momentum to that, and I think tax reform would help in that regard.
And we keep hearing that employers are having a very difficult job filling jobs because skills are not aligning with the needs, and they're having problems finding employees who can pass drug screenings.
Right.
And you continue to hear that.
Yes, workforce is the common issue that I hear from large businesses and small businesses. There's some exciting things going on. The governor's committed to it. Secretary Heiner, Secretary Gill, Secretary Ramsey, of all those three cabinets are doing some really fantastic work on workforce development. Our chamber just opened a workforce center within our chamber just this year and hired an executive director. That's going to be the focus, I think, for the foreseeable future. How do we match people with the appropriate skills to jobs in the modern economy?
A few seconds left. How unsettling is it to business to have the way forward on health care unclear?
Well, yeah, I think it's back to the drawing board in Washington on health care. The positive side of that, aside from what people think about Obamacare and all that, the positive side is that I think now there's a commitment. You might have seen the statement from Senator McConnell and Speaker Paul Ryan on Thursday saying that we're now ready to move on tax reform. And that has to happen on the federal level. So the business community, I think, is going to quickly focus its attention on tax reform and doing some things that are long overdue.
All right, Dave Adkisson from the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, really appreciate you coming by.
Glad to be here,
as
Bill.
always. And we thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. I'll see you bright and early this week on WKYT This Morning, and we hope you make it a good week ahead.